Hello. Can anybody see me? Not yet. All right, hang on. We'll be there. Nope, I'm not being seen either. Crap. Let's see if we can see you guys. Nope. Oh, there's Dan. All right. So maybe. Oh, I know what the deal is. There we go. Here I am. And
Okay, I see you.
Brass. Okay, can we? Can you see Brass, Dan? There we are.
Yes.
There we go.
Excellent
Here
picture this week.
are. Dang, you guys. What a wild week. Like we were gonna do we were talking about doing some other stuff earlier this week. And coming off of the 1916 rebellion in Ireland, and all of the things that have been happening this week in the US, it seemed only fair to try and kind of make a little bit of sense out of what's going on. And yeah, I just want to, first of all, cheers to you guys.
Yeah. Cheers.
Oh.
Cheers. I'm drinking Strongbow, kind of in honor of the of last week's episode. With what I realized was this interesting glass that I chose. I completely not on purpose, by the way, and having nothing to do with this episode.
Is that Charlotte's Web? What is that?
I can't quite figure out. What is it?
It looks like a pig from Charlotte's Web.
Yeah, it is. It's Wilbur, and I didn't realize that was what I had picked for this weird episode. So the vibe is out there, man. What you got, Dan? What are you drinking?
I'm just going with Aperol Spritz.
Oh, nice.
Very inspired.
No, it's not. It's not an inspired episode. It's not like I'm gonna drink Shinerbach.
But I found Shinerbach, which is just one of the best sort of big market beers you can possibly find.
It is.
It's so delicious.
It's a good what my wife and I refer to as biru. Because in Japan, if you walk into a place, they're not like, oh, what kind of beer would you like? Would you like an IPA? Would you like, usually they carry only one brand of beer.
Right.
And it tastes the same as several other brands of beer. So you just ask for biru and you get your big old frosty glass of biru, and it is exactly what you ordered, a glass of beer. And Shinerbach is beer.
Yeah, it's delicious. I love it.
So solid. So sorry. So back to kind of this week, I wanted to touch base with you guys, right? We are in Los Angeles, we're in Chicago, and we're in Sacramento, and all three of us in these cities experienced protests, followed by rioting, followed by looting. And I know that in Sac, it wasn't as bad as everywhere else, but I kind of wanted to give you guys like a chance to sound off, because today's episode is about law enforcement. And I wanted to see, there's a lot of conversations about the role of law enforcement in what happened last night. And I kind of wanted to see if you guys had anything that you're bringing to the table after a very heavy weekend, and where your heads are at regarding U.S. law enforcement.
Brass, you want to go first?
Brass?
Oh, what? I can't hear
go
Dan
first?
at all. Do I have to jump back out?
No. You hear me?
I was asking if you want to go first.
I can't hear or see Dan.
Oh no. Yeah, jump back out and
Jump
back
out?
on.
Okay.
Okay.
Right back.
In the meantime, why don't you give us some thoughts, Dan? I mean, I can tell you guys right now that that here in Sacramento, it was very focused, and it was a very small crowd that stayed through the night and did the looting. I know that it wasn't as violent and as wild as. Yep, we'll see you, Brassy. 1 second. Okay, all right. So here in Sac, it wasn't like we know that the Sacramento police have a history of overreacting and doing crazy things. There were stories yesterday that they might have accidentally shot a 13-year-old at some point. I haven't seen that in the news anywhere, but those stories run around because it's not outside of the realm of possibility that might have happened. But I just wanted to see how's Chicago? How is
in my own personal neighborhood, it was very, very quiet.
Yeah, same.
Last night, But you know, just like Sacramento or Los Angeles or anywhere else, Chicago has pretty bad history with its cops from time to time. So yeah, I honestly I don't know. I was following it on the news and on Twitter and stuff like that. We have a new superintendent, just started last weekend. Already got reamed out because of the violence over Memorial Day.
Right.
So, and probably a little nervous, new guy on the job. I don't know. I think it felt kind of probably light.
Yeah.
You know, just sort of making sure that there was no serious, not that looting isn't serious, but serious injuries and stuff like that.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Brassy, I know that LA's experience with the police was completely different.
Right. So living in LA, as you know, everybody, you have a lot of artists as friends, and they're people that have great camera equipment. They have people with, you know, a creative or, you know, a determined eye, I should say. They all went down, they descended upon downtown with signs and in their, you know, proper defensive gear, just in case. I mean, it's also, you got to think about sunburn, you got to think about hydration, all that. They went down there and they were literally taping the LAPD breaking off, like snapping off and starting the riots. So peaceful protesters were down there going, this is so cool, you know, doing big pan shots. And then all of a sudden you see the police break the windows and it's like, oh, it's on. Tear gas. Here we go.
Yeah.
So
Right.
literally the authorities were the ones creating a bad narrative for the whole experience and making it go right to hell.
And I think Chicago is very wary of that because 1968, the Democratic Convention was a cop riot.
Jeez.
Like the cops are the ones that rioted. And I think that's still very much, yeah, that's very much in the
and I think, Brassy, that like a lot of what I'm seeing out of LA is that yes, there was looting and there was riots, and there were people that were misbehaving, but the police response to it was so over the top that it worsened the situation, and I think that's a good jumping off point for us for today, because you know there's so many questions about how did we get here? Like, how on earth are we at a place where did the cops start it? Right? Is it the government that's pushing certain things? Like they seem to add fuel to the fire. And then there's also the questions of like these tropes of outside agitators and all of these things. And as we know from everything we discuss, this has its roots deep in our history. And so I wanted to, like, we did a quick shift into this, and my apologies as always, just to everybody, like we all know that these are always poorly researched and that they're always with a lot of inaccuracies. So,
Right.
but this one in particular, like I didn't need to go too deep to fill an hour.
No.
These are very much undergraduate history papers written at 2 a.m. with no research.
Don't say no research. Plenty of research, but yeah, that's the gist. Undergraduate research papers is spot on. So I wanted to kind of start off with like what was law enforcement? Like, look, the idea of police, by the way, the word police stems from the word, anyone?
Polis?
Yes, polis.
No.
Oh, the people.
Yes.
Which is Greek for city or for yeah. So polis, I think, is city.
Yes.
But it might be people too.
Well, I don't think it's an exact. It's like the city and the people as a thing. There's not an exact.
Yeah, the etymology is it has its roots in the idea of a city or a grouping of people. And in fact, early policing in the U.S. was exactly that, right? It was based on the English system of policing, which was, do we need to call the military in for this or not, right? Like that's literally.
Which is an interesting thing. Sorry to jump in. So the military was sort of the police force for most countries for a long time, and it's very like especially I would say like the Anglophone world, the military policing is very not awesome, right?
Yeah.
And so it starts with Robert Peel, right, in 1828 in London, and the fact that we have the police blues. They wore blue uniforms to differentiate themselves
from the red uniform.
The military.
Yeah.
Which is, I really enjoyed researching that. I thought that was an interesting little, and they're called Bobbies because of Robert Peel.
There you go.
Fantastic.
Wow.
But I'm going to go a little bit earlier than that. I'm going to go back to the watch, right? Which is why we have this Rembrandt here below us. And I think I love this painting. I love Rembrandt.
It's one of the best paintings.
But this is possibly one of the best paintings on the planet, because I'm a big fan of, like, this crew, this team right here. The three of us are big fans of the banality of existence. I think that we know that no amount of regalia and lace and sashes and swords makes up for how little we have our shit together. And this painting is a perfect example of that, right? Like, what we have is if you take a good close look at it, there's a dog barking at the drummer. There's people falling over themselves. Somebody's accidentally shooting a gun off right by somebody else's head. I'm serious. If you look in there, that there's a kid running around, and that was policing. That was policing.
Right.
At its very, very earliest phase. And
those were citizens.
They were
citizens.
They were volunteers.
Walked around.
Yeah. And so let me do a little bit of let me go to my notes here. I am going to use my notes. But the policing was basically, there were two kinds of police. There was the watch, which is what we see here, and this is like the night watch. Basically, from the Boston created a night watch in 1636, way before we were a country. New York in 1658, and Philadelphia waited till 1700. The night watch was not a particularly effective crime control device. Watchmen often slept or drank on duty. While the watch was theoretically voluntary, many volunteers were simply attempting to evade military service, or were actually assigned to be part of the watch as a form of punishment. So if the local magistrate was just like, you tried to rip off the widow, you've got to serve in the watch, right? So early watch wasn't like really. It wasn't so much about law enforcement and more so as community defense. Right. And like, so people, if somebody obviously kills somebody, you send the watch over and they're like, we're taking you in. Right. And it's very similar to posses. And the whole posse system is based on the watch. Right. And so you think about the United States, where volunteer systems made up the military and they made up the watch. This whole idea of the people by the people, and the whole idea of a posse, was very deeply ingrained in our psyche. And so there's definitely there is an appeal to community justice in the U.S. That isn't as strong elsewhere because systems in the U.S. are still pretty are still very much in their infancy. So I think it's kind of interesting, even to this day, this idea of a posse, or the legal term is posse comitatus, these terms are still used by the present-day militia movement in the U.S. in order to justify a lot of extrajudicial moves that they make, right? So when folks in Oregon took over that like bird sanctuary, like those lunatics, Bundy, is that the name?
Yeah, the Bundys.
Yeah, they took over the bird sanctuary. They tried to justify it legally because they're brilliant legal minds. Under posse comitatus laws that extend into British common law and stuff like that. So it's really super interesting, and it's definitely deeply ingrained.
Right.
But I think that I think it's almost wrong to say that our law enforcement actually begins here, because this is community policing, and what we're looking for is more of the structured policing, right?
Which I think is interesting, and it, like I said, it goes back to England from what I was researching about the community, right? And that's where like the London Metropolitan Police Force, the Bobbies, were about the community will take care of itself. The Crown doesn't need to be involved. The military doesn't need to be involved. We will handle this ourselves. And yeah, there's something very important about that I think is important.
And it's very democratic.
Right. And it's very important, I guess, within sort of the Anglo-Saxon view of the world.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think and again, like we want to think that the police resemble the community, but I think what happens is, as is often the case in the U.S., you have sort of a bifurcation of systems, and you have two things working simultaneously, right? You have sort of the night watch, which is all the like kind of the Keystone Cops. Some dude accidentally setting off a gun Rembrandt picture. And then you have what are constables, and constables are a little bit different because they were officials of the government in a way that watchmen weren't. And they were basically hired to carry out legal warrants. And so the idea of like a sheriff or a constable is separate from the idea of a watch. And those two merged much later. In history. So I think there's something interesting about.
Well, the sheriff is such a fascinating thing, right? The sheriff started out as a tax collector, a server of royal or warrants, and the census taker. Not really law enforcement as we think of it.
Yeah.
Today, like they could arrest people, but they weren't cruising the streets looking for problems.
Right. They weren't policing, right? And that was basically left to the watch. And I think one of the interesting things is how like watchmen, it could be a punishment to be a watch. Here's what's interesting: if you were rich enough, you could actually, and it was kind of like you eventually, as there became more of a need for policing, as communities grew, and the watch just wasn't cutting it. There were volunteer groups similar to militias of the watch, and everybody had to serve on them. But the rich people would pay someone to do it for them. And ironically,
so rich people paid their way out of something?
That's so weird. It's almost like I can't
weird.
even use the words in a sentence.
I'm glad we don't live in
make
that
sense
world
together.
So
I hope it doesn't take off, whatever this is.
But I think what's interesting is that they would pay someone to not have to serve in the watch, to go in their stead, and usually it would be like a criminal or a community thug that would go in and take place in the watch. And I think that's that speaks to the nature of police work, that instinctively folks would go to people who might have been a little bit unsavory to do that. And again, I think it's important at this point to do a caveat. I don't want to do police bashing, because I do understand. Look, when something goes wrong here, I'm going to call the cops, right? Like I live in a neighborhood where there's a lot of folks who are having a really difficult time, and are transient, or experiencing homelessness. And a lot of them have addiction issues, and a lot of them have psychological issues, and they sometimes end up on my lawn, and they pose a threat to myself, my dog, and
also your wife.
Yeah. Oh, her. Yeah. And I call the police. I depend on the police to take care of this issue and help provide safety. And I understand that they do so at risk to themselves. I understand all of these things. And yet, I also understand a lot of the issues inherent with the system, and where the system, basically as we built it, went awry to a place where it may not be fixable, and we'll get into that. But so I wanted to get us back on track here, by saying that Philadelphia. Constables were official law enforcement officers, usually paid by fee system or by the warrants they served. I think that's also interesting, right? They were bounty hunters. They would get a warrant, they would grab the warrant, and then they would go and pull a Rooster Cogburn, and hunt them down and bring them to justice, right? And again,
right.
We'll see that, in the history of the U.S., Dog the Bounty Hunter.
The U.S. Marshal system is a really fascinating system. I mean, they're basically a federal police force now, but in the 1800s, they were like federally licensed bounty hunters.
Yeah. So before we jump into there.
Yeah.
So just a little bit about the etymology of sheriff, I think, is interesting. Basically, the name, a sheriff was a legal official with responsibility for a shire. The term being a contraction of shire reeve. So sheriff, shire.
Oh,
reeve.
wow.
Yeah, there you go, right?
Love it.
And so while we have like the like night watch of drunks and like thugs and people, like the early watchmen did not want to wear badges or any form of like anything that would signify what they were doing, because they thought it would ruin their reputation.
Wow.
So, yeah, right. So
that started all the way back at this point in time.
Yeah. So back to what we were talking about, that the U.S. has a bifurcated system, right? And what we have going on in the North is absolutely not what's going on in the South. In the South, what happens is you have this land of bounty, and you have a lot of nobility from Charles I, right? We learned that a lot of these royalists escaped to the New World. Carolina means Charles land, basically. Charles. And a lot of these nobles ended up down there, and there's a lot of gentility down there. And gentility does not want to work the land. And in the same way, neither do people who see themselves now as somewhat equal to that gentility. And so there's a dearth of labor. And there's a need to bring in what is basically the equivalent of peasant labor from the equivalent to the European peasant labor into the U.S. And so then begins the transatlantic slave trade. And when you have a group of people that you need subjugated in subhuman conditions, you need people to do the subjugation. And in the South, they weren't called the watch; they were called pate rollers, or patty rollers, or paddle-rolls, or patrollers. And in fact, the first formal slave patrol was created in Carolina in the colonies in 1704.
Oh.
Yeah. So let's do a little let's enough Rembrandt.
And
Go
I'm
ahead.
interested to talk about the men, because it was all men that were the patrollers. There's an interesting sort of class status thing going on here. I think about the patrollers were not the wealthy themselves.
Right.
It was poor white people, desperate situations sent out to do this work. So there's a racial issue and there's a class issue, and it's a mess.
Yeah.
Right?
So let me read this paragraph because I think it's important. It's important for us to know, right? So in the southern colonies, policing's origins were rooted in the slave economy and the radically racialized social order that invented whiteness as the ultimate boundary. Whites, no matter how poor or low, could not be held in slavery. Blacks could be enslaved by anyone: whites, free blacks, and people of mixed race. The distinction and the economic order that created it was maintained by a legally sanctioned system of surveillance, intimidation, and brute force whose purpose was the control of blacks. Slave patrols, or paddy rollers, were the chief enforcers of this system. Groups of armed, mounted whites who rode at night along plantations and settlements of their assigned beats. The word originated with the patrols seeking out runaway slaves, unsanctioned gatherings, weapons, contrabands, and generally any sign of potential revolt. And one of the things that I read as I was doing my my research was this notion of gallant men, gallant white men riding in horseback to bring these slaves into justice, right? And I think we all know what that means, right?
Yeah.
Like, there's no question about what that became.
There it is.
Right?
Yeah.
And here
all
we
the ingredients were there.
Here we see the origins of what would later become community policing in the South, and it is tied to racial injustice. And whether we can go like, well, come now, right? We can tut this as much as we want, and we can say it was a long time ago, but we all know that the 1800s, late 1800s, is not that long ago.
No.
If we still have places named after Charles I, it wasn't that long ago. We don't have places named after Nebuchadnezzar, right?
Right. Well, it's very simple. Do you know someone that fought in World War II?
Right.
Great. That person knows somebody that was alive during the Civil War, and we're done.
And we're done. And so here's just an incredible picture of these slave patrols harassing black folks, asking to see their papers and their licenses.
Mm-hmm.
And you can deny whatever you want about our current police system, but you cannot deny how crazy similar this image here of black men being apprehended by malicious looking white men and their dogs.
And their dogs.
And their dogs. And dogs will play into it. And dogs will play into it.
As they did yesterday on the Twitter box.
Right. And again, like, you can say whatever you want, but then look at the shape of this runaway slave patrol badge, and it is undeniable how intrinsically the birth of modern policing and of community policing in the U.S., especially in the U.S. South, is tied to race and is tied to the subjugation of black people, and that's it. That's it. They were tied. And unless you did a lot of hard work to untie those two, you still have it. And a lot of work has not been done to untie those two. So go ahead, Dan.
No, sorry. Finish what you're saying, and
No,
then,
no,
and
that's
then,
it.
and then I'll go into.
That's it.
Oh well, so what I'm seeing, what's shaping up here is, and we'll probably get into it a little more as we get into the industrial era, post-Civil War North, and specifically, let's be honest, the Irish becoming cops in the big cities in the North.
You are
And so I'm seeing two strains,
exactly
and how the Irish protected themselves by becoming the cops, right? Like Gangs of New York, right? Like,
Yeah.
it was sort of their own gang. It's a great movie.
Cops of New York, History Happy Hour, approved.
Yes, but there's two strains coming in here.
There are,
and I'm really and they've.
Yeah.
Where do they come together?
And let's talk about the other one, right? Because the other one also has issues that we are still dealing with today. And
Right.
what you're going to see is that this race-based policing in the South and other policing in the North are just going to meet, and we're going to call it modern day policing. So let's move on to 1838. 1838, right? It's classic. 1838 is when Boston establishes its police force, and
Right.
and we're just like, yeah, this is the guy. These are the guys, right? Look at that. That's them guarding the Liberty Bell,
Right.
which is
Boston cops, right? They're great with their
Boston
accents
cops.
and the whole getup.
It's Americana. So 1838, first publicly funded organized police force with officers on full-time duty was created in Boston. At this point, Boston, large commercial center, shipping. This police force was built to do what? To protect shipping, to protect business, to protect commerce.
Property. They're property cops.
So that a bunch of drunks couldn't run onto the ships dressed as Indians and throw the tea into the harbor?
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. So the first police force, like actual police force in New England, wasn't created to protect people. It was created to protect property. And then the best part about it is that, like, originally merchants were paying for the police force, and then these merchants came up with a way to save money by transferring the cost of maintaining a police force to citizens by arguing that it was for the collective good.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Right.
That's pretty
private
sneaky,
wealth,
sis.
public debt.
Pretty sneaky, sis.
Yeah. So what we have here is then the marriage of policing to corporate interests. Very early on in the very first police force, and we have in the South a completely different tradition of policing, right? And so you kind of get into what I refer to as a little bit of like the golden era of American policing. And the only reason I call it the golden era of American policing is because it gave us this, right? And I think
what is happening here?
Oh my gosh, that's what I'd look like as a cop. Well,
not wrong, not incorrect. But from this is NYPD, and New York Police Department was very, very much attached to Tammany Hall and the interests there. So just think about this, you guys. Tammany Hall was the political structure of New York. It was a Democrat.
It's a whole episode in and of itself.
It is a whole episode, and it's amazing. But basically, Tammany Hall owned brothels. It owned like illegal, like all sorts of opium dens, brothels, boxing.
It owned New York.
They owned New York. And they also were in cahoots with the police force. And so the same people policing were actually just protecting the interests of Tammany Hall and of these political interests, right? And what's amazing about this is from this world of cops, from this world of New York cops, came Teddy Roosevelt came Grover Cleveland.
Yeah.
Both Grover Cleveland and Teddy Roosevelt were former cops,
Commissioners.
commissioners,
Right.
police commissioners, right? And
Yes.
and in a very like it was a very here's another just amazing. I think this is Chicago or something. But from like, so what we have here is, again, like every single structure that we have seen here made for police work, none of it is actually serving the public interest. Rather, they are under the guise of serving the public interest, basically working on racial subjugation, corporate interest, and political interest. And that is how these police structures were founded, right?
Mm-hmm.
So moving along here, let me just read a little bit about this. Businessmen in the late 19th century had both connections to politicians and an image of the kinds of people most likely to go on strike and disrupt the workforce. So it's no coincidence that by the late 1800s, all major US cities had police forces. Fears of labor union organizers and large waves of Catholic, Irish, Italian, German, and Eastern European immigrants who looked and acted differently from the people who had dominated cities before drove the call for preservation of law and order, or at least the version of it promoted by dominant interests.
Jesus.
Right? Police forces were created to be out of anti-immigrant sentiment. And again, like we have literally like all of the worst things that plague us today are the reasons why these police forces exist. And
so were the police Irish, or is that, or is that just a myth?
At least, yeah. So the Irish integrated themselves into the political system through basically through the doorway of the police. Because remember, you don't want to wear your badge in public because you want to preserve your reputation. But if you're Irish, you have no reputation. So your only way into being, into this society and into the upper echelons of it was through police work.
Right.
But here's something interesting. So let me give you guys an idea of what of some of the stuff that was going on. People who drank at taverns rather than drinking at home were seen as dangerous. So anybody who drinks outside of their own house is dangerous, which already means that you have a house where you have enough room to drink, right? Like it's not you're in a one room like shanty with your wife and your 3 children, right? People who drank in taverns were seen as dangerous. It's businessmen who maintained this belief, and often the ones who profited off of the commercial sale of alcohol in public places, that told the police these things. At the same time, the 19th century was an era of political machines, so police captains and sergeants for each precinct were often picked by the local political party ward leader, who often owned taverns or ran street gangs that intimidated voters. Then they would use police to harass opponents of that particular political party or provide payoffs for officers to turn a blind eye to allow illegal drinking, gambling, and prostitution.
So that bar you bust, because that's other party bar. This bar you leave alone.
Yep.
And you know what? Stop on by and have a drink while you're on patrol.
Don't mind if I do.
Well, I really wish I was drinking right now. It's like enough in the day. I'm working on lemon water right now. I feel like I just need to reset. I've had a pretty bad couple days, but I really am drinking with you in solidarity.
Yeah. I hear you, and I want us to keep plowing through this because it's a wild one. But Brass, like I just want you to know, like, I know that you are in the thick of it and that you hear sirens and stuff happening all the time right now, and that you are in a community right now that has been affected by police overreach at the moment. And if you need to hold space for that, we are here to hear that. So just so you know. So this is kind of the situation in cities in the East. And then we're moving out west, right? So during this period in time, there's also Western expansion, also of import, because what happens is law sort of is a vague thing. We're back to sort of the idea of a constable and a constable and and a posse, right? And so here's something that blew my mind. I love it when like I find an image that blows my mind, right? This is a West. This posse is from 1922.
Oh, wow.
That's not very long ago.
It's not.
That's not long ago.
Wow.
Not.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so what we have is we have that going on in the West, and we have this going on in the East, and which is we have a posse going on in the West, and we have these sort of mustachioed, prodding political creatures in the East, and in the South you have kind of what the idea of a police force melting with the watch concepts of the North. By this point in time, every major city has a police force based on the rough structure of the police forces in Boston and in New York. But in the West, it's wicked wild, man.
Right. Well, what's interesting is a group, and maybe you'll mention them in a minute. One of the most famous law enforcement groups in the world, the Texas Rangers.
Oh, God.
Right. Like almost a paramilitary force.
Yeah.
Right? Bounty hunters, Indian hunters. Now, I mean, they are basically at this point like the Texas State Bureau of Investigation and the state police, right?
Nowadays, yeah.
Anyone from Texas that I'm wrong, please tell me I'm wrong. But they were a fascinating little group of people back in the 1800s, right? And so famous. But also, I'm interested to know, are they the melding of this slave patrols with modern policing?
Yeah, I mean, you said it yourself, right? So remember, Texas, and this is for anyone from Texas hearing. I will call this out over and over and over. Texas was a slave state. The reason the Alamo existed is because Mexico abolished slavery and Texas wanted to double down on slavery. The Texas Rangers were, in fact, slave patrols, and the Texas Rangers were also a group of people who sought out and killed and murdered Native Americans, also for land. So any questions about like Texas and about the Texas Rangers and about institutions in the South that anybody might have, come at me, because that is exactly how these groups were founded. And if we're ever to move ahead from this, if we're ever to get past this insanity, we have to come to terms with that and reform and readjust and rethink the institutions that we have. The fact that the Texas Rangers weren't like, oh, you know what, that was an amazing part of our history, and very much like the Lone Ranger, it's a place it's something to put in our back pocket. But the fact that there's an insistence on maintaining those institutions, institutions, says to me that the idea of these racist institutions is more important than the actual rule of law, than it is to treat people well and to police community.
Right. LaBeef is a very charming character.
Yes.
Yes.
Oh,
but that's not the story.
And the story of the Rangers and the romantic idea of the Texas Rangers is beautiful, right? Like I love me some Texas Ranger like lore. Make no mistake, like they are a police force founded on a lot of these issues that we're talking about, and they had even more free reign than even your usual group of like what do you call it, constables and localized sheriffs, and they were allowed to pursue things in a way that was basically lawless.
Well, and what's interesting, you bring up a point about Western law enforcement is, and we still have it today, is this overlap So you had a U.S. Marshal for the region, you had a county sheriff, you had a town cop or a town marshal, right? And they were all in different people's pockets, right? Like one of the best, and I know it's completely fake, but I think a fun fictional way of saying it is in the movie Tombstone,
I was
where you
waiting.
have all of these different
I was
people
waiting on
coming
it.
together,
Yeah.
and they're all in different people's pockets.
Yeah.
And there's a whole interesting thing about here that we can get into, because we want to keep this short, about Republicans and Democrats post-Civil War establishing order in a lawless land, and the Earps and the Clantons. It had more to do than just law. They hated each other. They wanted each other's lands. But another episode. Go on.
Another
That
episode.
got me excited. Sorry.
But yeah, and also like I had this picture ready to go, right? Because it's awesome. My God, if there's one thing that I love about this country, it's the American West. So much promise, so much tragedy, so much drama, so much romance. Look at these badasses. Like, of course we love this, and of course, as a country, like how can you not love law enforcement when they befriend Val Kilmer, for God's sakes?
Right.
And yet, this is at a very basic level still the Night Watch and the posse. And these guys eventually melted into this hydra that we're seeing built out east. And so basically what the modern policing hydra did was it brought in the sheriffs and the law enforcement of this time, which was wild, right? It was posses, and it was hanging people with an apostrophe, right? Like judge, jury, and executioner, and it was wild. And you definitely do not want that, right? You do not want posses. You do not want vigilantes. This country loves itself some vigilantes. You guys saw the bow and arrow lap yesterday. Did you guys see that?
Right. No, what?
Did you guys not hear about the guy with the bow and arrow?
No.
Oh my God! In Utah, they're calling him diabetes Legolas. Basically, there was this old guy who looked like Wilford Brimley.
Okay.
Who decided to take a bow and arrow and start shooting at protesters. And
oh my God,
he got his ass beat, and then they overturned his car and lit it on fire.
In Utah?
Right.
In Utah.
I didn't know Utah had it in him.
Yeah. That's and is he related to the guy from Greeley that they found in Pakistan with the broadsword that was hunting Osama bin Laden?
Let's skip that.
Okay. So I want to get back. So getting back on track. Sorry. Part of Old West law enforcement, though, and we should point it out, was because of the vigilante problem.
Wow.
That they were like, no, okay, we have to have an official situation.
Wow.
Right. You guys just can't go to the bar and drink a bunch of whiskey and then go get the people you don't like.
Yeah.
Right.
You're not in charge. So part of Old West law enforcement was actual law enforcement, right? And trying to get rid of this vigilante mobs going out.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
So yeah, what a knot we're in already.
Yeah, right.
It's a Gordian knot. It is a
Gordian knot. Yeah, absolutely. And so I do want to give a big important shout out to the idea of detective work and police work. Because in our notion of justice, in our notion of what is right and wrong, crimes need to be solved and they need to be detected. And people need to be brought to justice. And the Pinkerton Agency at the time was basically another like romantic idea of like sleuths and detectives, right? We're looking at the same time that Arthur Conan Doyle, maybe, and all of these like these ideas of policing start capturing our imagination. And the Pinkerton Agency came in and sort of mainstreamed that. So I want to just do a little shout out to the Pinkertons real quick so that we know where that came from, because right now we're talking about like crazy ass cops. We're talking about like Wyatt Earp, whose idea of like problem solving is bristling his mustache and shooting
Right.
a gun, right?
Get in that smoke wagon and go to work.
Yeah!
And that's
In that smoke wagon. Oh no.
You gonna use that, or you just gonna sit there and bleed?
Oh God.
Whoa!
Oh no.
All right, Pinkertons. Just a real quick shout out, because detective work, and again, I am not opposed to the idea of justice. I am not opposed to the idea of community policing. I am opposed to the systems and the entities that we have now, because they are flawed and they do not allow for the humanity of the people that they're supposed to be policing, or the humanity of the people that are doing the policing to come out. They get constrained into a system that serves no one other than the worst of our national shames. So so back to Pinkerton. Pinkerton National Detective Agency is a private security guard and detective agency established in the United States by Scotsman Alan Pinkerton in 1850, right? Scotsman in the UK, important in police work. And so it makes sense that one of them came here to the US and made a living of it. Pinkerton became famous when he claimed to have foiled a plot to assassinate President-elect Abraham Lincoln. Claimed to have foiled the plot. Okay. Anyway, Lincoln later hired Pinkerton agents for his personal security during the Civil War. Pinkerton's agents performed services ranging from security guarding to private military contracting work. Notably, the Pinkerton National Detective Agency hired women and minorities from its founding, a practice uncommon at the time. Pinkerton was the largest private law enforcement in the world at the height of its power. So what we see here is that there is a need for actual law enforcement and justice and detective work, and the rich have access to it. But police work and community policing is in the hands of Wyatt Earp and his siblings, right? So, I mean, it might be a simplistic way of putting it, but it's also not entirely untrue. So let's kind of move past this. As we saw, this posse was from the 1920s, and so it's easy to say that all of these are still kind of creating the giant knot, and I think the Gordian knot is a great way of putting it. But then in the 1920s, you also have an important thing happening, and that is a lot of union unrest. Right, we're talking about the time following the World War I. You have a lot of unions. You have a lot of socialists and communists and folks that are trying to get a better cut of what is happening. And because the police work for these political and corporate machinations, the police serve as an arm of the government to suppress these political movements, right? Mm-hmm. So imagine, I'm saying it right now as the President of the United States is literally doing this, right? So imagine right now. Let's make it the Democrats, and from a cultural standpoint, the president says Democrats are anti-American. You're either a Trumpist, a Republican, or a Libertarian. Those are the only three things you can be. And it's like, and so if the people in power have control of the police, the people in power can say, hey, we hear that there's some Democrats gathering and they're planning, a protest. Let's send them in, right? Let's not let them do that, because they're trouble. They cause trouble, and they're not a legitimate group of people. They're not a legitimate party. They don't have a right to exist. They're a terrorist group. And so what happens is the police then become a source of union busting, because they're serving political machinations. And as if that wasn't a corrupting influence enough, what then immediately follows, also in the 1920s, is prohibition.
Oh God.
Right. Okay.
So policing and prohibition basically turns it up to 11, right?
Yeah.
And the interests that we see from Tammany Hall, right, where like I own the bar down the street and I own the cops, all of that comes into play in an even bigger, more violent way.
Right.
Dan, do you want to talk at all about like?
Well, where my mind, what I wanted to talk about with this is, as our police forces have become much more militarized over the years, I would venture to say, at least in the modern day, it started here with prohibition. And yeah, like the cops would show up, and don't get me wrong, like I love The Untouchables, one of the best movies, right? But cops started seeing that the people they were going after, to a degree, were so heavily militarized, right? Like the gangsters, Al Capone, the Chicago outfit, had huge machine guns, right? The Tommy guns, all of this, that the little 6-shooters that the cops had were no match for what the gangsters had. And so I think this is one of the first steps, and we'll revisit it again in the 60s, where the cops were desperate for heavier weapons. And I think this is where we're really starting to get into the militarized police force. Yeah. So that's the topic I wanted to sort of talk about with prohibition.
Yeah. And so I think, so basically what you see is police forces who are corrupt in large percentages, right? Chicago, where you're at, Dan,
right.
LA at this point in time, also very famous for having a very corrupt police force.
LA Confidential.
There you go.
Right.
Was later in the 40s, but all of this is basically like you can trace a line about police corruption in its height, which I would say was basically the 20s, 30s, and 40s. I think police corruption was at a. Go ahead.
If anyone's interested to talk about police corruption, the series Boardwalk Empire takes place, right? And his brother is the sheriff. If you haven't seen it, see it. Do yourself a favor, but it's a good fictional example.
Do you find it historically appropriate?
I mean, I honestly couldn't tell you how accurate it is, but it's a damn good show.
Good. Okay.
and really, that's what we're about here. We're not about historic accuracies. I'm sure I'm going to be hunted by the Texas Rangers after this. I'm already yeah, I think we start seeing just the bulking up of police forces, and this idea of us against them. You see a societal shift towards the upright cop, sort of, and the ne'er-do-wells, Bonnie and Clyde, all of these kind of all of these things basically begin to push this idea of or continue to propagate, because I think it existed. It's always existed, this idea that the lawman is good and the lawless man and the other person, it's not even the lawless man, it's the person that's not the lawman is bad, right? And here we have a classic example here in the 40s of people protesting Hitler and a cop not approving. Who are these people, right? Who are these folks that dare take to the streets? I'm watching you, Buster, right? And really,
right.
What are they? What are people protesting? Now we look back at that and we say, like, this isn't anything to be like that. Yeah, fight against imperialist whatever fear or whatever it is in the back. So I think it's important for us to sort of see like what role the police played even into the 40s, 50s, and then of course we have images that are in our psyche and in our national psyche forever, right? And those are the images of the South and the police in the South during the civil rights era. And I think what's
right.
interesting and what you see here is a really important some very important visual cues as to this idea of people being deputized, right? And the posse and that sort of vigilante being okayed in the face of racial suppression and racial and discrimination. And so what you see here is a uniformed police officer and two idiots,
citizens.
Yeah, two dudes wearing hard hats and billy clubs and guns. Two rednecks carrying a poor black woman who's struggling. And if anything, you know, there are pictures like this across the country at this period in time. But I think the thing that separates the South from other places is that here we have deputized folks who are also enacting these laws, and this idea that law doesn't apply to everyone; it just applies more to others. All of these things are deeply rooted in our system, and they didn't go away just because we said they go away. They didn't go away because we have an MLK holiday, right?
Right.
This is not that long ago. All our parents were around during this time.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So it's exasperating to look at. And I'm not going to let the northern cities or the western cities off on this. Here's New York.
Right.
Right. I think that's New York. It still could be the South, but it could be New York for all we know. And again, it's also just there. Chicago, racially motivated policing is still an issue, and it was an issue this weekend, and it didn't just go away because the civil rights era is over.
Right. I mean, Denver, with Mexican Americans in Denver in the 60s. Things got ugly.
Los Angeles.
Yeah, of course.
I mean, this is the LA riots of '92. I did work on a project for the Watts riots, and the similarities between the Watts riots and what's going on right now are inescapable. It is a conundrum, and it is a national conundrum, and it's going to take work, and it's going to take honesty. It's going to take honesty, because as we've just kind of been through this journey, like, it wasn't that long ago, and
no,
we've never addressed it, and we're using the same institutions. Hi, Texas Rangers. We're using the same institutions that we used back then to try and solve problems of today, and those institutions were built to suppress the people we're supposed to be helping. You know, that's kind of how I see it.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's a mess, and we did it in an hour or so. I mean,
yeah,
we could stretch this out over 2 or 3 episodes.
We could, but I feel like, and I know I rushed through the end there, but I think we got to the meat and potatoes of it. Anything, Bress, you want to say something?
Just my major takeaway from this is that they were assembled in order to protect property, and were relegated to taxpayers under a thinly veiled promise of it's for you too. But number one, first and foremost, property protection. And the slave patrols, Jesus Christ, they didn't even bother to change the badge. And on modern law enforcement, we're still rocking that star. Wow.
Yeah, you would think that
Holy
you would,
shit.
you know?
Cover your tracks a little bit. But then again, they're not sorry. They're not trying to hide.
No.
They think it's real. They probably get off on the fact that they're hiding in plain sight about it.
I think that the ties to police right now and white supremacist groups are disturbing,
Right.
It's something to be looked at. But like, we need to do our due diligence as a society and look at these things and try to come up with a way of addressing it. Otherwise, we're just going to do this over and over and over.
It'll happen every 30, 40 years.
Well, I mean, I think the time in between is getting shorter.
Yeah,
Ferguson wasn't that long ago, and we've set a new standard for what this might look like. And all we got to do is wait for the next inevitable, because this is the system, inevitable moment where racism kills another person, and the suppression and the idea of property over life and property over well-being also kills someone. So I don't want to we've already been sufficiently preachy. I think it's really heavy, and I think it's for us, like, it's very emotionally loaded. We've all been enduring this all weekend long, and I don't want us to crash. I did want to give us an opportunity to do some show and tell if you guys have anything. I'll start if you guys need to run around the house and try to find something. I can't hear you, Dan. You knocked out I think you knocked out your thing.
Yeah.
There it is.
Oh, okay.
Dan? No, you knocked it out. Anyway, so I'm going to go first, though. Can't hear you. It's definitely your microphone, though. Anyway, I'm going to go first. Thud, but specifically Terry Pratchett's series of the Night Watch is actually like a really fun way of learning about how modern police forces came to being, at least in the UK, and how it starts with a community need and leads to like what it is now. And I think the UK's policing, they don't, yes, they serve the state, yes, they serve interests, but they don't necessarily they don't have a lot of the issues that we have here. The series, the Watch series of the Terry Pratchett Discworld series, like the Watch books, are a really fun way of learning about that, and without knowing that you're actually learning about that. So as you study the history of policing, and you read this, you're like, oh, that's cute how they did that. They basically tell the same story by doing.
Subversive education is my favorite.
Subversive education.
Love it.
Dan? Nope, still can't hear you. Unplug your earbuds. No. All right. Brass, do you have anything you wanted to say?
It's so intense. Like I said, I'm about 5 minutes from downtown, so I'm getting kind of an earful. Like, I'm soaking in it. And I'm thinking, oh shit, I don't have anything around the house.
Yeah.
Because I don't fuck with cops. But what I will show you, I have here in the freezer, just for a little base flavor, I keep frozen bacon. I like to put that in my ramen noodle, and I like to kind of start a couple sauce bases with that. So I got some frozen bacon chops here. Delicious. That's all I have.
That's your show and tell for.
I'm sorry, I'm going to get in big trouble for that, but I really
I promise you, I'm going to get more trouble for the Texas Ranger stuff. Dan, do you have anything? Dan says 1 second.
Sign language, because
this is going to be the charades version of this, everybody. So if you're not looking, I will tell you what Dan's doing right now. He's playing with headphones and he's untangling them. I can't hear him, but I'm pretty sure he's breathing heavy.
Oh.
Nope, still can't hear you.
Oh, damn it, Dan! You really.
Yeah, can't hear you. Anyway, do you have a show and tell? I can narrate it for people. He does have a show and tell. It's a billy club.
It's a billy club.
Smokes. It's got another strap.
Boy. Why does Dan have that? Why does Dan have that?
Why do you have that, Dan? I don't know. He doesn't know. He doesn't know. He just has it. He likes wielding sticks. He's a big fan of Teddy Roosevelt, and he likes the big stick.
Okay. That is actually very cool, and I bet that has a good feel to it in the hand. I bet it has a good weight.
Yeah, does it?
I bet it's got a little.
He's moving it back and forth. He's wrapping it around his hand.
Yeah.
waving it around like a Keystone Cop. All right, guys. I think that's more than enough for today. We're gonna go out with the leftover of the Keystone Cops, but I'm gonna leave us in audio form so that we can chime in on what's going on. But yeah, thanks a lot, you guys.
Okay.
What a good episode.
Yes, thank you. No justice, no peace.
No justice, no peace. No racist police. Here we go. And you know what's amazing about these guys is like the Keystone Cops is such a thing about tropes about, do the police actually help or are they just getting in the way, right? So here we see.
They're all so discombobulated.
That's right. That's right.
Clownish. They were like a clown car.
Exactly.
They rolled up like a clown car.
And what's interesting is the Keystone Cops were actually made by a Frenchman who brought this whole idea from a French studio, and the police in France evidently a similar kind of like watch them bumble. So there's definitely a universality to it. But I think what really kills me about this is like, look, they're just standing around, and there's actual help that's needed. And when there's actual help that's needed, they seem a little bit reckless. And
they're blind and deaf to the reality.
Yeah, fleet-footed. This is the best right here. And using guns, just using guns the whole time, like just shooting at random, I think is also important.
Oh my gosh, this is probably what the stormtroopers were based off of.
Running into each other. I mean, we can make all sorts of connections and try to feel like it's fun. And again, nothing against like the police officers who do the work, and that do protect us, right? That do serve that important community part. But also, there's something really, really liberating about watching this. Randomly shooting guns. All right, you guys. Bye, everybody.
Bye.